Hi everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Malice in the Mitten. I am your host, Tracy Preston, along with my bestie, Christine Mulligan. Hey, Christine.
Hey, Trace. Hey, everybody. All right, what are we getting into today? What kind of malice are we going to be mincing?
Oh, this is an interesting story that we are bringing to our listeners today. One that brings much controversy, and I mean much. I personally believe in it because my heart lies with compassion and the wishes of those on the fringe of death. Today's story was written and researched by Angela Hoefler. Thank you, Angela. So, let's get into it.
Okay, let's get into some much malice.
Much. It's much. It's much.
Malice.
Mucho.
Mucho mas. Okay.
All right, let's get it. All right, this is season 7, episode 28. Dr. Murad Jacob Kevorkian, aka Dr. Death. Today we are bringing you the story of a very controversial subject, along with the man who brought the controversy to the forefront. He made this journey very public because of his passion and empathy for the right of patients to decide not only how they want to control their life, but also their death. Dr. Jack Kevorkian made headlines in the late 1980s and early 90s because he was an advocate for assisted suicide and euthanasia by a physician for patients who chose to end their suffering, by those who had terminal or lifelong illnesses that they felt and believed made their lives not worth living. Some would call him a monster, others a saint. He was given the nickname Dr. Death. Was he an empathetic and practical doctor who cared for human life? Or was he full of malice and murder? That is for you to decide after hearing his story. We are asking that you try to put all social norms or what you think is a social norm on the shelf. Imagine you or someone that you love are suffering with a terminal illness. Really sit with this and breathe through it. Imagine for yourself what these humans are going through. If you have never seen what suffering looks like, it may be difficult to understand. But all I'm asking you is to sit back, listen, and really think before placing judgment. I can speak for myself, and I'm sure Christine as well, when I tell you that I have seen true pain and suffering, knowing that death is just beyond the door. It is inevitable. The suffering is real. The emotional toll on both patients and families breaks your heart to your core. What would you do? What would you want for yourself or someone you love?
And let me just tell you, just like you said, it runs the gamut. There are some people that are going to think that he deserves the death penalty himself, which is ironic. And then there's other people that think he's a saint, just like you said. But I think every case, just like with everything else, is always going to be in and of itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. All right. So I'm interested. I'm interested to see where you go with this talk. But I also think that this is a slippery slope that we may be giving, at least for myself. I don't know if I'm totally impartial because I have seen so much suffering. I think I'm a bleeding heart nurse in a way. But at the same time, I do understand people that have terminal illnesses and they go to Kevorkian and it may not be the best situation. So I'm really interested. I'm interested in where this is going to go, Trace.
Okay.
Let's see.
All right, here we go. We are going to start from the very beginning of who Dr. Kevorkian was, where he came from, and how his journey began. Murad Jacob Kevorkian was born in Pontiac, Michigan on May 26, 1928, to Armenian immigrants from the Ottoman Empire, what we know today as Turkey. His father, Levan, who was born in 1891 and passed away in 1960, was born in the village of Pasan near Erzurum. And his mother, Seyteneg, was born in 1900 and passed in 1968, was born in the village of Govdam near Sivas. His father left Ottoman Armenia and made his way to Pontiac, Michigan in 1912, where he found work at an automobile foundry. Seyteneg fled the Armenian genocide of 1915, finding refuge with relatives in Paris and eventually reuniting with her brother in Pontiac. Levin and Seyteneg met through the Armenian community in their city, where they married and started their family. The couple had a daughter, Margaret, in 1926, followed by son Murad, and then their third and last child, Flora.
Okay, can I just stop you right now? Because I'm listening to the story of his mother, right? His mother is the Seyteneg?
Yep.
Okay. Can we just say that this is not boding well for Dr. Kevorkian, that his mom's last name is Satan's egg? What in the actual? Are we telling, like, a comic right now? What's happening? Are we... For some reason, I just feel like we just took a turn into, like, animated special of the week.
I know, it's not starting off well.
Yeah, I mean, a Saint egg from the same kind of place that the mythical vampires are from.
Just saying.
What is happening? That was the whole vibe that I got.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
I got the imagery of Transylvania in my head right now, is what I have.
Got it.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry. I digress. Let's go back.
Okay, here we go. All right, so during his childhood, Kevorkian regularly attended an Orthodox church with his parents. He began to question the existence of God, reasoning that an omniscient deity would have intervened to prevent the Armenian genocide experienced by his extended family. By age 12, he had ceased attending church. Demonstrating exceptional intellectual abilities, Kevorkian was a child prodigy who taught himself several languages, including German, Russian, Greek, and Japanese, which often led to social isolation among his peers. He graduated with honors from Pontiac Central High School in 1945 at the age of 17, and later earned his medical degree from the University of Michigan Medical School in Ann Arbor in 1952. Kevorkian completed his residency training in anatomical and clinical pathology and briefly conducted research on blood transfusion. Over a period of decades, Kevorkian developed several controversial ideas related to death. In a 1959 journal article, he wrote, quote, "I propose that a prisoner condemned to death by due process of law be allowed to submit his own free choice to medical experimentation under complete anesthesia at the time appointed for administering the penalty as a form of execution in lieu of conventional methods prescribed by law." Senior physicians at the University of Michigan, where Kevorkian was employed, opposed his proposal, leading him to resign rather than cease advocating for his ideas. Despite his efforts, he received minimal support for his plan. That doesn't come as a surprise to me. After the Supreme Court's 1976 decision in Gregg versus Georgia reinstated the death penalty, Kevorkian revisited the concept of utilizing death row inmates for medical purposes. He proposed harvesting organs from executed inmates for transplantation into patients in need. However, he was unable to secure cooperation of prison authorities. Now, I can't say I disagree with that.
Yeah, not at all. I didn't even know this about Kevorkian. I mean, like, I feel like I've heard a lot about him. I never really dived into his whole story.
Same.
But this is super interesting and actually frames everything I do already know about him in a really spooky framing.
Yeah.
Like, it's even more weird. I'm really vibing that whole Transylvania vibe right now.
It's really feeling real.
Yeah, it's really feeling like, he is a vampire.
Yeah, I'm kind of going with it. I like where he's going. I mean, these patients these prisoners are going to be executed, so why could we not harvest them and save people? I like where his head's at on that.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, like, that's a really slippery slope. That's still human. They're still human.
But they're also going to be executed.
I hear you, and I understand that, but I don't know. I still feel like they're still human until, I don't know, that's a slippery slope for human research. That's just, I don't know. I can't get down with that, but I hear you.
Yeah, it's food for thought. Definitely food for thought. Now, this next bit, I'm really interested about your thoughts on this because I have a few thoughts. As a pathologist at Pontiac General Hospital, Kevorkian experimented with transfusing blood from the recently deceased into living patients. He drew blood from corpses recently brought into the hospital and transfused it successfully into the bodies of hospital staff members. Now, I don't know what the outcome was on that, but my brain is like, well, immediately your body starts to degrade. So what is the success of that? What are your thoughts? I'm thinking organ failure. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I would be seriously interested in how that panned out.
Yeah. It's definitely food for thought. This guy is thinking way, way out of the box. Now, he even thought that the United States military might be interested in using this technique to help wounded soldiers during a battle. But the Pentagon was not interested. Again, very interesting forward-thinking thought here. In the 1980s, Kevorkian wrote a series of articles for the German journal Medicine and Law that laid out his rationale related to the ethics of euthanasia. In 1987, Kevorkian began to advertise in Detroit newspapers as a physician consultant for death counseling. Well, it only took a handful of years, but he had gotten a bite. He was contacted by a woman named Janet Atkins. She was a 54-year-old woman who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 1989. After much consultation, Kevorkian carried out his first public assisted suicide in 1990, and I mean public. He had taken her to Groveland Oaks County Park. Now, I'm assuming this was her wish. She was in a van. The back end of the van doors were open, but actually I say doors, but it almost to me looked like a VW Bug. And you could see like the back, like the top window like came open, and you could see like she was on a bed and you could see her feet sticking out. So maybe that was, she wanted to have this view of nature. I'm just hypothesizing. I didn't see that, but clearly this had to have been a conversation that they had together. At her side was Dr. Kevorkian, along with his suicide machine, and when she was ready, it was Janet who pushed the button to administer medications that would comfortably put her to rest. Quote, "She was conscious of what she wanted to do. She understood that she wanted to die. She wanted to end her life." In a televised interview, Dr. Kevorkian explained, quote, "It's really the way lethal injections are carried out, except this is self-execution. Dr. Kevorkian was charged with first-degree murder. The attorney who represented him was Jeffrey Feiger. The delivery mechanism from the suicide machine and the lethal dose of medication was delivered from Jane herself. This act would avoid a charge of murder, as it was the patient that took these steps on her own accord. Right. When in court, Mr. Feiger presented, quote, "Michigan has laws against murder. It's illegal to kill yourself, but there's nothing against assisted suicide." The judge's response, quote, "You're right." And that basically was the end of that. Gavel smack, not guilty. The charges of murder were dropped on December 13th, 1990. In 1991, however, the state of Michigan revoked Kevorkian's medical license and made it clear that he was no longer permitted to practice medicine or to work with patients. His California medical license was suspended in April of 1993 by an administrative law judge, with Kevorkian's attorney responding that Kevorkian, quote, "will go on assisting people to commit suicide," and basically daunted that California judge, quote, "to come catch him." Kevorkian raised an enduring ethical question that continues to challenge the American public. What responsibilities do medical professionals have when patients experiencing significant suffering request assistance in dying? The debate includes whether individuals should possess the right to make end-of-life decisions, particularly in cases of terminal illness or persistent pain. Advocates often invoke the principle of personal autonomy, inserting, quote, "our bodies, our choice." However, the boundaries of this autonomy are widely debated. Critical considerations include whether individuals facing severe and untreatable illnesses should be compelled to endure prolonged suffering or impose significant caregiving burdens on their families. Comparisons are frequently drawn to veterinary practices, where euthanasia is considered a humane response to animal suffering, raising questions about the application of similar principles to human care. Society and many religious traditions often view suicide as morally wrong or unacceptable. There is considerable discussion about the impact of suicide on families and friends. However, the loss of a loved one can profoundly affect those individuals, regardless of the circumstances of death. Physicians are dedicated to healing, alleviating suffering, and prolonging life within the boundaries of medical science. Yet, there are situations where medical intervention is no longer effective and recovery is not possible. These complex ethical and existential questions have arisen frequently, notably highlighted by Dr. Kevorkian's work, which brought significant attention to end-of-life issues. Kevorkian's attorney, Jeffrey Feiger, mentioned that he assisted in the deaths of 130 terminally ill people between 1990 and 1998. In each of these cases, the individuals themselves allegedly took the final action, which resulted in their own deaths. Kevorkian allegedly assisted only by attaching the individual to the euthanasia device. It was the patient and the patient only that pushed a button of their own accord, which administered life-ending medications. Dr. Kevorkian said, quote, "My aim in helping the patient was not to cause death. My aim was to end suffering. It's got to be decriminalized." According to a report by the Detroit Free Press, 60% of the patients who died with Kevorkian's assistance were not terminally ill, and at least 13 had not complained of pain. The report further asserted that Kevorkian's counseling was too brief, with at least 19 patients dying less than 24 hours after first meeting Kevorkian. The article went on to say, quote, "A psychiatric exam in at least 19 cases was not given, 5 of which involved people with histories of depression, though Kevorkian was sometimes alerted that the patient was unhappy for reasons other than medical conditions." In 1992, Kevorkian himself wrote that it is always necessary to consult a psychiatrist when performing assisted suicides because of a person's mental state is of paramount importance. Now that's a quote. The report also stated that Kevorkian failed to refer at least 17 patients to a pain specialist after they complained of chronic pain, and sometimes failed to obtain a complete medical record for his patients. With at least 3 autopsies of suicides Kevorkian had assisted was showing the person who committed suicide to have no physical sign of disease. Rebecca Badger, a patient of Kevorkian's and a mentally troubled drug abuser, had been mistakenly diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The report also stated that Janet Atkins, Kevorkian's first euthanasia patient, had been chosen without Kevorkian ever speaking to her, only with her husband, and that when Kevorkian first met Atkins 2 days before her assisted suicide, he, quote, "made no real effort to discover whether Mrs. Atkins wished to end her life," as the Michigan Court of Appeals put it in a 1995 ruling upholding an order against Kevorkian's activity. According to The Economist, quote, "Studies of those who sought out Dr. Kevorkian, however, suggested that though many had worsening illnesses, it was not usually terminal." Autopsies showed 5 had no disease at all. Little over a third were in pain. Some presumably suffered from no more than hypochondria or depression. In response, Kevorkian's attorney, Jeffrey Feiger, published an essay stating, quote, "I've never met any doctor who lived by such exacting guidelines as Kevorkian." He published them in an article for the American Journal of Forensic Psychiatry in 1992. Last year, he assembled a committee of doctors, the Physicians of Mercy, to lay down new guidelines, which he scrupulously follows. However, Feiger stated that Kevorkian found it difficult to follow his exacting guidelines because of persecution and prosecution, adding, "He proposed these guidelines saying this is what ought to be done. These are not to be done in times of war, and we are at war." In a 2010 interview with Sanjay Gupta, Kevorkian stated an objection to the status of assisted suicide in Oregon, Washington, and Montana. At that time, only in those states were assisted suicide legal in the United States, and then for only terminally ill patients. To Gupta, Kevorkian stated, "What difference does it make if someone is terminal? We are all terminal." In his view, a patient had to be suffering but did not have to be terminally ill to be assisted in committing suicide. However, he also said in that same interview that he declined 4 out of every 5 assisted suicide requests on the grounds that the patient needed more treatment or medical records had to be checked. Kevorkian was tried 4 times for assisted suicides between May 1994 and June 1997. With the assistance of Feiger, Kevorkian was acquitted 3 times. The 4th trial ended in a mistrial. The trials helped Kevorkian gain public support for his cause. After the Oakland County prosecutor Richard Thompson lost a primary election to a Republican challenger, Thompson attributed the loss in part to the declining public support for the prosecution of Kevorkian and its associated legal expenses. In the November 22, 1998 broadcast of CBS News 60 Minutes, Kevorkian allowed the airing of a videotape he made on September 17, 1998, of which he gave 60 Minutes the videotape himself, which depicted the voluntary euthanasia of Thomas Yauch, 52 years old, who was in the final stages of Lou Gehrig's disease. After Yauch provided his fully informed consent, which was read to him, and he verbally acknowledged each statement before signing it on September 17, 1998, Kevorkian himself administered the lethal injections. The interview on 60 Minutes played the final moments of Tom's life, who was suffering horribly from his disease. Before Thomas's body began to break down from Lou Gehrig's disease, he led an active life, restoring and racing vintage cars. In just 2 years' time, Tom was wheelchair-bound. He had lost the use of his legs, his arms. He could barely hold his head up. He had difficulty forming words. He was in terrible pain, had trouble breathing and swallowing, and would often choke on his own saliva, which was a horribly frightening experience. After Tom signed the consent, Dr. Kevorkian wanted to give Thomas additional time to think about his decision. He started off saying, quote, "Do you want an additional month to think about this?" Tom said no. "Well, how about a couple of weeks? Would you want to wait a couple of weeks?" Again, the answer was no. "Well, how about another week? Would you want to wait another week?" And this time, Tom said yes, 1 week. But it was the very next night that Dr. Kevorkian received a call from Tom's brother. He said, quote, "Tom wants it now." Now, please remember that Tom was very afraid of choking to death, and perhaps it was that he felt he was on the verge of this. Dr. Kevorkian said, "I couldn't say, 'No, you have to wait another week.' This man was terrified. I couldn't have him suffer in that frame of mind. The man was terrified, and it was up to me to dispel that terror." After Tom and his family arrived, they said their goodbyes, and they were asked to leave the room so they would in no way, shape, or form be accessories. Once they were gone, the door was shut, and the video recording began. Dr. Kevorkian once again asked Tom if this was something he wanted to do. Tom resoundingly said yes. Once again, Tom signed his name to his consent with that current date. The video shows Kevorkian himself administering IV Seconal, also known as secobarbital, and that was administered, which is basically a sedative, and sometimes this is given before surgery as a sedative, and this immediately relaxed Tom. His head gently fell forward. Next, a muscle relaxer. As Tom was drawing his last breath, he relaxed his head back against the headrest of his wheelchair. Lastly, potassium chloride to stop Thomas's heart. In just moments, Thomas was free from his debilitating body. It was a peaceful passing for him, one that not only he, but one that his family wanted for him as well. Now, the biggest thing that stood out here was that it wasn't the patient doing the euthanasia, but it was Dr. Kevorkian. Now, during his 60-minute interview with Mike Wallace, he said, "In watching these tapes, there's almost something ghoulish in your desire to see the deed done." To which Kevorkian responded, "Well, it could be. Maybe it is ghoulish. I don't know. It appears that way to you. I can't criticize you for that. The main point is the last part of your statement, that the deed be done." Tom's family, his wife Melody, brothers Terry and Bob, and mother Betty, all said Tom was a fighter. But he finally decided he needed Dr. Kevorkian. Dr. Kevorkian wanted to record this to end this once and for all. He wanted to force his arrest in order to have a trial. He said, quote, "Either they go or I go." When Mr. Wallace said, "What does that mean?" Kevorkian said, "If I am acquitted, they go because they'll never convict me. Or if I'm convicted, then I go. I will starve to death in prison, so I will go. One of the two of us is going to go, and that's why I did this. The issue has got to be raised to the level where it is finally decided." Mike Wallace also interviewed Thomas's family. In particular, his wife Melody said, "I'm so grateful to know that someone would relieve him of his suffering. I don't consider it murder. I consider it humane. I consider it the way things should be. Tom was very private, and he believed this was a private issue, and you should be able to do what makes sense to you. I'm shocked that it has come to this, that in the 90s, we have to make such an issue out of something that a person should be in control of, their own life and death." Tom's brother said, "We were at the end of our rope. We didn't have any options. If it wasn't for Dr. Kevorkian, we don't know what we would have done."
I just want to inject here that when people are terminal and at the end of their life, they do go into hospice. And essentially, hospice in the last stages is really just prolonged treatment of what Kevorkian does in a day.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Been there.
As a nurse, if I were in that specialty, being hospice, as nurses, hospice nurses, we essentially just give muscle relaxers and sedatives in a build-up situation, giving more and more and more as time progresses, until inevitably we just give so much that their systems cease to be able to function. With, of course, the coupling of the disease process also making the body systems incapable of fully functioning. So yes, there is a symbiotic cease to function thing that happens, but essentially that's what hospice is just a prolonged treatment of the same treatment Kevorkian is given. So that's where, for me as a nurse, that's where I'm like, okay, yeah, body autonomy, right? Because I'm a big believer in body autonomy. Without going anywhere else, I believe that everyone should have ownership of their own body, which is body autonomy, and whatever that means. And you talked about the legality of suicides earlier as you were going through the story, and I didn't want to interrupt, because the thing is that one point in the court where it's illegal to commit suicide, but it's not illegal to commit assisted suicide. So he got off, right? Because there was no precedence. But the thing is I never understood why it's illegal to commit suicide. And once suicide is deemed that it happened, I mean, where's the legality of that? Who gets arrested? Nobody. So why is it even illegal to commit suicide? Like, I never understood that at all.
I know. What are you gonna do? You're gonna put a corpse in. You're gonna what?
Yeah, you're gonna fry the corpse? I don't understand.
Yeah. You're going to put them in prison?
I don't understand why suicide is illegal. If somebody commits suicide, I mean, that's on them. That's their business. That's their body. That's what they wanted. And I know that it gets real steeped in a bunch of controversy depending on people's experiences with suicide or their experiences because they have known someone who's committed suicide. Ultimately, that was that spirit, that soul's choice. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it was their choice. So when it comes to that, I wholeheartedly believe in people being able to make their own decisions, even if I don't agree with their rationale. It's still them. It's their issues. It's not for me to judge. It's not for me to understand. It's just for me to respect. But when someone else gets involved, it is a slippery slope of how much influence are they having on this. So I find it interesting that Dr. Kevorkian utilized this case to be on video, to be so, this is the case he decided was going to be his soapbox to stand up on. I find that interesting because I do remember, because I was, in college when a lot of this was being thrown around. So I do remember having conversations about it because my first college initially was a medical degree, ended up being a business degree, but initially it was a medical degree. So I remember conversations about this, and I remember doing debates. And I do remember even back then, I was very body autonomy, each person's decision is nobody else's business. And I understand that's my personal opinion, and it means nothing in the grander scheme. I do get a little bit fuzzy when it comes to other people's impacts on people's choices.
Right.
Is that making sense?
It makes a ton of sense. And let's just think about this aspect of it. Who steps in when we decide how we're going to live our life? Nobody. Right? So if we are in control of our life, whether I want to go to nursing school, whether you want to rob a bank, or this person over here wants to commit crime or do drugs, whatever our decisions are, get married, don't get married, have kids, don't have kids, nobody steps in on that because we are in control of what we do with our life. So, I mean, you and I both worked in the units. We've seen gunshot wounds to the head. We've seen hangings. I could get into it, but I'm not going to get that deep into it. But if those people are going to do this anyway, I don't know. That one I'm kind of on the fringe about, but I'm definitely into, and I'm definitely support this guy. And I think the reason Kevorkian chose this particular person to share this video with, and it's in the show notes, and I really hope that people watch it. I hope you watch it. You will see how this man was in life and how debilitated he was. He could use his hands. He couldn't lift up his arms, his legs. He had a very difficult time speaking. I mean, there was nothing left. There was no quality.
I remember it. I mean, it's not fresh in my memory because it was years and years and years ago that I've seen the video. Right. But I do remember it. And that's why I said, I think that it was interesting that he picked this case because not all of his patients, some people would call them victims, I call them patients, not all of his patients, because they came to him because he was a doctor.
Right.
So let's say patients, all of his patients were not as clean as this one. This one was very clean.
Right.
This one was very evident. The empathy factor was immediate because of his trial and tribulations, but not all of his patients were that close to death's door.
Agreed. And also, one of the links in the show notes is that first patient, Janet Atkins. That one felt weird to me because he videotaped her in counseling with him along with her husband. Now, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, okay? I did not see any outwardly signs of Alzheimer's. She appeared very cognizant, sitting up nice, prim and proper. He asked her if this is really what you want to do. Resoundingly, she said yes. That one is a little more difficult for me to swallow, but again, it's not my life. It's not my choice. So, I bounce back and forth with what's ethical, what's not ethical when I say, oh my gosh, absolutely, like this poor guy Thomas. I would not want that life. That is a horrible life. For me, no quality. And nothing more could be done. This man will die. The other thing I think about too, and I know we're going on and on about this, but it's important. The other thing I think about as well is who wants to die in a hospital bed? Why can't you have the choice to be where you want to be the last moments of your life?
Agreed. Yeah, it's the autonomy of it all.
Yep.
Yeah, I understand. I that's where I'm at on it. My only hiccup with all of this is the influence on others. And unfortunately, it's the system that muddies those waters anyway, because people can't do what they want to do sometimes.
Right.
And they reach out for help, and even that help sometimes is unattainable. And Dr. Kevorkian is a definitive picture of, is it help or is it harm? And the jury, not to be facetious, but the jury is still out on that, I think.
Yeah. So let's move on.
Okay.
All right. On November 25th, 1998, Kevorkian was charged with first-degree murder and the delivery of a controlled substance by administering the lethal injection to Thomas Yauk. Because Kevorkian's license to practice medicine had been revoked 8 years previously, he was not legally allowed to possess these controlled substances. On March 26, 1999, a jury began deliberations in the first-degree murder trial of Kevorkian. He had discharged his attorneys and proceeded through the trial representing himself, a decision he later regretted. The judge ordered a criminal defense attorney to remain available at trial as standby counsel for information and advice. Inexperienced in law, but persisting in his efforts to represent himself, Kevorkian faced great difficulty in presenting his evidence and arguments. He was not able to call any witnesses to the stand, as the judge did not deem the testimony of any of his witnesses relevant. After a 2-day trial, the Michigan jury found Kevorkian guilty of second-degree homicide. Judge Jessica Cooper sentenced Kevorkian to serve 10 to 25 years in prison and told him, quote, "This is a court of law, and as you said, you invited yourself here to take a final stand. But this trial was not an opportunity for a referendum. The law prohibiting euthanasia was specifically reviewed and clarified by the Michigan Supreme Court several years ago in a decision involving your very own cases, sir. So, the charge here should come as no surprise to you. You invited yourself to the wrong forum. Well, we are a nation of laws, and we are a nation that tolerates differences of opinion because we have a civilized and nonviolent way of resolving our conflicts that weighs the law and adheres to the law. We have the means and the methods to protest the laws with which we disagree. You can criticize the law, you can write or lecture about the law, you can speak to the media or petition the voters." Kevorkian was sent to Lakeland Correctional Facility in Coldwater, Michigan, to serve his sentence. After his conviction and subsequent losses on appeal, Kevorkian was denied parole in 2007. In an MSNBC interview aired on September 29, 2005, Kevorkian said that if he were granted parole, he would not resume directly helping people die and would restrict himself to campaigning to have the law changed. On December 22, 2005, Kevorkian was denied parole by a board on the count of 7-2, recommending not to give parole. Reportedly terminally ill with hepatitis C, which he contracted in the 1960s, Kevorkian was expected to die within a year in May of 2006. After applying for a pardon, parole, or commutation by the parole board and Governor Jennifer Granholm, he was paroled for good behavior on June 1st, 2007. He had spent 8 years and 2.5 months in prison. Kevorkian was on parole for 2 years under the conditions that he would not help anyone else die or provide care for anyone older than 62 years old or disabled. Kevorkian said he would abstain from assisting any more terminal patients with death, and his role in the matter would strictly be to persuade states to change their laws on assisted suicide. He was forbidden by the rules of his parole from commenting about assisted suicide procedure. Now, Kevorkian gave a number of lectures upon his release. He lectured at universities such as the University of Florida, Nova Southeastern University, and the University of California in Los Angeles. His lectures were not limited to the topic of euthanasia. He also discussed such topics as tyranny, the criminal justice system, politics, the Ninth Amendment to the United States Constitution, and Armenian culture. He appeared on the Fox News channel's Your World with Neil Cavuto on September 2nd, 2009, to discuss healthcare reform. On April 15th and 16th, 2010, Kevorkian appeared on CNN's Anderson Cooper 360, where Cooper asked, quote, "You are seeing doctors play God all the time." Well, Kevorkian said, "Of course. Anytime you interfere with a natural disease process, you are playing God."
Valid point.
Yep. Director Barry Levinson and actors Al Pacino, Susan Sarandon, and John Goodman, who appeared in You Don't Know Jack, a film based on Kevorkian's life, were interviewed alongside Kevorkian. Kevorkian was again interviewed by Cavuto on Your World on April 19, 2010, regarding the movie and Kevorkian's worldview. You Don't Know Jack premiered April 24, 2010 on HBO. The film premiered April 14th at the Ziegfeld Theater in New York City. Kevorkian walked the red carpet alongside Al Pacino, who played him in the film. Pacino received Emmy and Golden Globe awards for his portrayal and personally thanked Kevorkian, who was in the audience, upon receiving both of these awards. Kevorkian stated that the film brings tears to my eyes, and I lived through it. In 2011, disability rights and anti-legalization of assisted suicide and euthanasia group Not Dead Yet spoke out against Kevorkian, citing potentially concerning sentiments he expressed in his published writing. On page 214 of Prescription, Medicide, The Goodness of Planned Death, Kevorkian wrote that assisting suffering or doomed persons to kill themselves was merely the first step, an early distasteful professional obligation. What I find most satisfying is the prospect of making possible the performance of invaluable experiments or other beneficial medical acts under conditions that this first unpleasant step can establish. In portmanteau, word obituary, in a journal article titled The Last Fearsome Taboo, Medical Aspects of Planned Death, Kevorkian also detailed anesthetizing, experimenting on, and utilizing the organs of disabled newborns as a token of, quote, daring and highly imaginative research that would be possible beyond the constraints of traditional but outmoded, hopelessly inadequate, and essentially irrelevant ethical codes, now sustained for the most part by vacuous sentimental reference. Kevorkian had struggled with kidney problems for years. He was diagnosed with liver cancer, which, quote, may have been caused by hepatitis C. According to his longtime friend, Neil Nicole, Kevorkian was hospitalized on May 18, 2011, with kidney problems and pneumonia. Kevorkian's condition grew rapidly worse, and he died from a thrombosis, or clot, on June 3, 2011, 8 days after his 83rd birthday, at William Beaumont Hospital in Royal Oak, Michigan. According to his attorney, Mayor Marganroth, there were no artificial attempts to keep him alive, and his death was painless. Kevorkian was buried in Whitechapel Memorial Cemetery in Troy, Michigan. Judge Thomas Jackson, who presided over Kevorkian's first murder trial in 1944, commented that he wanted to express sorrow at Kevorkian's death and that the 1994 case was brought under, quote, a badly written law aimed at Kevorkian, but he attempted to give him the best trial possible. Jeffrey Feiger, Kevorkian's lawyer during the 1990s, gave a speech at a press conference in which he stated, Dr. Jack Kevorkian did not seek out history, but he made history. Feiger said that Kevorkian revolutionized the concept of suicide by working to help people end their own suffering because he believed physicians are responsible for alleviating the suffering of patients, even if that meant allowing patients to die. Kevorkian spoke at Presbyterian and Episcopal churches to gain support for euthanasia. John Finn, a medical director of palliative care at the Catholic St. John's Hospital, said Kevorkian's methods were unorthodox and inappropriate. He added that many of Kevorkian's patients were isolated, lonely, and potentially depressed, and therefore in no state to mindfully choose whether to live or die. Derek Humphrey, author of the suicide book Final Exit, said Kevorkian was, quote, too obsessed, too fanatical in his interest in death and suicide to offer direction to the nation. In a 2015 Retro Report story about Kevorkian's legacy and the Right to Die movement, journalist Jack Lessenberry said Kevorkian, quote, got a national debate going, which I think he helped stifle by his own outrageous actions. Howard Markle, a medical historian at the University of Michigan, said that Kevorkian, quote, was a major historical figure in modern medicine. The Catholic Church in Detroit said Kevorkian left behind, quote, a deadly legacy that denied scores of people their right to dignified natural deaths. Philip Nitschke, founder and director of the Right to Die organization Exit International, said that Kevorkian, quote, moved the debate forward in ways the rest of us can only imagine. He started at a time when it was hardly talked about and people got thinking about the issue. He paid one hell of a price, and that is one of the hallmarks of true heroism. As of June 2025, there are 12 states in which death by dignity is legal, and another 17 states are considering it this year, none of whom are Michigan. The epitaph on Kevorkian's tombstone reads, he sacrificed himself for everyone's rights. In 2015, the 1968 Volkswagen Type 2 van in which Jack Kevorkian assisted some of his suicidal patients was bought by paranormal investigator Zach Baggins for the documentary series Ghost Adventures for display in his Haunted Museum in Las Vegas. Personally, now I don't know what your experience was. As everybody knows, we've mentioned before, we are both critical care nurses. I worked in open heart and neurotrauma, critical care, and I have been that nurse. In our unit, when we have a patient that there's basically nothing more that we can do. There's absolutely nothing more we can do. We always approach them about hospice because continuing, in my opinion, to torture these people, the end is coming. There's nothing that's going to stop it. We approach them about hospice care. There's not always beds in hospice, right? So in our unit, I have been in that role of the hospice nurse. We have the family involved. I would always explain at length how it works, what it does, what they're going to see. And I encourage the families to be there. Be here, whether it takes, because there is no time limit. I don't know how long this is going to take. I will take their cues. I explain to them, if I see pain, are you okay with me giving medicine? They're always like, yes, 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 please. So my goal was always to keep this transition pain-free. I would always encourage the patients' families to gather and talk about the good times, talk about who they were, explore and revisit those memories, play their favorite music. And I will tell you, in my experiences, and I had many, it was always a peaceful transition, and the families, even though they were sad and heartbroken, they knew what was coming. They had come to terms with it. But they said that that process was unlike anything they've ever experienced before, and they were happy for it. I mean, that's just my experience. I really do resonate with this process. As we talked about earlier in the show, some of these things are on the iffy side, but I wouldn't want to die that way. I wouldn't want to die being poked about. I want peace. I want pain-free. Did you ever go through that?
Absolutely. All right. So you were going to pose a question. So essentially your question to me and to the audience at large is, do you think Jack Kevorkian was a monster, or do you think that he was a humanitarian who wanted to help people suffering? That is very cut and dry, and I do not believe the answer lies on either side. I think that it's definitively a case-by-case basis. I think that we as a society, as a human race, need to fully recognize that each individual should have license to their own experience, be it in life and death. I believe there's a spectrum of possibilities in any given case, but essentially, Kevorkian, no matter how you cut it, he did make history, and he really wasn't that much different than the very earliest predecessors of medicine. I mean, everything medical at one point was barbaric, and what's the word I want to say for completely gobsmacking to the average bird. You know what I mean? Like you said earlier, wanted to experiment on death row inmates. And technically, they did that back in the 1700s, 1800s, you know, back when medicine was budding and we were learning about the human body and all that. Whenever all that happened, you know, going all the way back, you know, a lot of that was barbaric to the average person. But that is, all of those barbaric things back then was what drove medicine forward. So technically, Kevorkian has a very large hand in modern medicine driving forward, in autonomy issues being brought to the surface. And like he said, every doctor plays God. And why do we have such a guttural, visceral reaction to assisted suicide? But nobody's up in arms with the fact that we keep some humans alive, medically alive, for years past their should have been expiration date. So why do we prolong the suffering of some, but admonish the haste that some others choose?
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Because as a critical care nurse, like you said, I have been the hospice nurse at times. I have seen people go quickly, and I've seen other patients suffer for years because their families refuse to let them go.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's a broad spectrum, and I really think that Kevorkian was definitely instrumental in getting the conversation out there. And unfortunately, I think society, the human race, has a ways to go before we understand that each person is their own entity and should be respected as such.
I agree with everything you said. And as you were talking about medicine was budding, all I could think about are the auditoriums and the patients that were laying there being sawed on and all the brutal stuff without pain medication, okay? What?
Right.
Brutal.
So, you gotta zoom out on this one, to really take it all in. You gotta zoom all the way out. I mean, no matter what we're doing, we're interfering with humanity, whether we're helping or harming. When it comes to medicine, it is a double-edged sword, period, end of story.
Yeah, agreed.
So the fact that he was demonized in such a way, even though this is the first time, I mean, I've heard and I've debated and I've listened and, I've even studied some Kevorkian things, right, throughout my life. Because, I mean, his time frame was right when I was first starting to go to school, is when he was doing all his legal troubles. And then as a young adult, I mean, that's when the movies were coming out. And you know what I mean? So Dr. Kevorkian has been a thing for all my life, just like, Sesame Street. Equivalently to Sesame Street being throughout my life, Kevorkian seemingly has been throughout my life. Ironic as it is. I really think that it's you got to zoom out to get the bigger picture, and he definitively has impacted the conversation, but not just on suicide and assisted suicide, but on life and medicine itself.
Agreed. And I also want to throw out that there are, I want to say 5 or 7 states where it is legal, but there was one case that really struck home for me. There was a young woman, I want to say she was in her late 20s. She had terminal brain cancer. And because she lived in one of these states, her choice, they actually give you pills now that can end your life. So she got a prescription. She wanted to die at home in her marital bed. And with anything in life, really, people always think, oh my God, that's completely out of this world. That's bonkers. That's nuts. But as time goes on, it's those out-of-box thinkings that help us move forward in one way or the other.
Agreed.
Yep. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us through this story. Thank you for being open-minded. We appreciate you. And we look forward to having you back on Wednesday for Round Robin. Have a great week, everyone.
Like and subscribe on YouTube.
Like and subscribe, baby. Bye.
Bye.